How do I get my students to be able to see this?
Ego se wegwego, Jordan ni Jungyats, Kanye Hagan ni Waguan Jordan on the Waxcar Labage. I always G eyes over Dagaridage, say Wahwadre down Oniskana as I wanted the Nyohage. So, hello everybody, my name is Jordan. I'm the head of the Native Interpretation here in education at Old Fort Niagara. And I belong to the Mohawk Nation. I'm a member of the Bear Clan. I hope everybody's healthy out there, as well as your family. And we're going to get right into it here. So what we're leading up to, what we're talking about here is the Treaty of 1764. But to understand it from a Native's perspective and to do so, you kind of have to understand the events that take place leading up to this, this great treaty. So all throughout the North American continent, especially with the early colonies, you have all of these Native people kind of doing everything on both sides of the fence, so to speak. So you had some Native nations who are aligned with the French, and they're receiving their goods, all of their provisions. Oftentimes, even during war, their families would travel with them as well, and they were being expected to be taken care of. With the kind of the deal that was made between the treaties of the warriors and the the power and non-native force there. Here at Fort Niagara, I focus on a Mohawk perspective quite often, but this gives me an opportunity to look in many different places, many different nations, and we can see the similarities and the differences, which is not really too vast and too far apart from one another, so they complement one another as well. So leading up to this treaty, you have a few things taking place. At the end of the French and Indian War, this is actually what kind of lays the groundwork for what starts to take place. You have, again, those natives that fought on both sides, fought against each other, and either way they were pulled in one of these directions. And each time they're pulled in these directions, the main objective is to maintain their own territory so they can continue to exist as a people. So after the French and Indian War, a lot of the French allied natives, they were no longer able to get those goods they needed to survive. The brass kettles, for instance, that were being utilized more often than the clay was. So even this trade kind of enters into our social structure, and it starts to change the way things we do in our social structure as well. We needed also the tools not only to defend ourselves, but also to do our hunting. So the musket and the rifle being quite sought after. And along with that, we need the black powder when we need the ball on our shot, because we're not producing any of those things. Metal knives, hatchets, something as simple as rope even kind of changes the way that we conduct ourselves as a people, because we don't have to utilize those elders on how we used to make and fabricate those things from nature itself. So we become dependent on these goods. So after the French, they kind of lose all of their power, right? And after the French and Indian War, they lose. So all their territory gets ceded to the British, and we start to see this westward expansion really start to happen and take place even more, because now instead of just venturing into the western New York area here and the Niagara frontier, settlers and colonists are now expanding, and they're heading out into the Ohio country, and they're also building, settlements, colonial establishments, but also they still have the British who take over all of those old forts, those French inhabited forts that they took over. Pontiac, being kind of aligned with the French, doesn't take too lightly to this, and he builds up the morale of the native people throughout the western Great Lakes, and he kind of starts going in and retaliating. He's reacting to the encroachment on his territory. So as he's kind of pushing everybody back, he's building up this force, which really takes a hold of the Great Lakes area as well. You then have natives here, the Shenandoah Senecas, who were originally portaging goods up to the upper Niagara. You had a loss of employment during this time as well. They were in such a long established agreement with the French, and then after that, the British took over this agreement for them to portage the goods. However, they end up replacing them with carriages, so they were no longer needed. So it was almost like a strike or revolt due to the fact that they relied on that industry, on that trade, on that employment, so to speak, that they were getting through there. So I think we have a video here, and what we're going to do is we're going to kind of show you this thought, this way of thinking these two young Native men often would have on their way, on their journey to one of these types of treaties. So we'll let you take a look at that.
Our people have been summoned, and we must go. Sir William Johnson wishes to talk peace with us. He wants the war with his children to end.
You speak of the English king as our father. Are you too young to remember? There was once another father, the French father.
They are not the same.
Are they not? A white ruler in a white land looks out for his own people, as we should.
The French king was defeated. The British defeated him.
The French father can be defeated and cast out. An English father can as well, along with his children.
Not here. Our English father is strong. He has thousands of warriors. He has hundreds of ships. His stone houses guard the rivers and the lakes. And he brings trade and he brings wealth.
Our people are not children to be ruled.
That is not what Sir William Johnson asked us to be. We are to speak together as brothers. We are to work together as equals. To come together in peace as allies.
What if he brings war?
We have already brought it. Chief Pontiac has brought it. The English no longer come to trade, and our people suffer for it.
Our Haudenosaunee brothers and sisters have already heard Sir Johnson's call. We will have a council fire. We will go to the old fishing grounds and ensure our voices are heard. We will see what your English father has to say.
So what we just seen there is two of these Native guys are obviously kind of in a conflict within their own party there. And as you see, as they're taking care of business, as the one is rolling up his blanket, he's the one that is quite referring to the fact that it's a peaceful thing. The trade has stopped. The issues for the Native people were affecting us due to this trade loss. And on the other hand, you had a Native man who was kind of skeptical, kind of really was a little standoffish as to why we're really making this trip, why we're making this meeting. However, in the long run, in this meeting right here on this video, it shows exactly how the Native people are thinking at this time during this conflicts, during these treaty makings. Many different Natives are traveling to these, not just a select handful of people. Particularly this treaty in 1764, you have over 2,000 Native representatives. So imagine all of those spokespeople, those representatives for their nation in particular. You have this kind of back and forth, this ongoing of constant rethinking, reassessing, moving forward as well, but still kind of bringing out all of these questions that one might have as to really what is going to benefit the nation as a whole. And that goes to show you that even the Natives, speaking of Pontiac, he was conflicted as well. It was his responsibility, the way he's seen fit, was to not rely on these trade items so dependently, to kind of resort back to being the original instructions of how the native people were to survive, how we are to treat and be, you know, caretakers of the earth, how we're supposed to use the elements that surround us, the animals, to clothe ourselves and feed ourselves. So he wanted to resort away from the whole colonialization of the native people. But upon doing so, that disrupts the whole trade industry from all of the Great Lakes here. And if you kind of disrupt all of the Great Lakes in the trade, you have many, many, many nations that rely on this trade on both sides of this fence again. And that's what we've seen in the video, is these two gentlemen kind of, you know, having a nice, responsible discussion about the differences and what they're expecting out of these trips. Now, on this trip, you see them, they're kind of walking. It looks like they're rolling up their camp, and there's snow on the ground. Now, this wasn't uncommon. The only way to kind of get around long ago was to either jump in your canoe or get on your walking shoes and have a nice little hike. However, you see the snow on the ground. Chances are they've walked quite a few miles to get to their destination, and the rivers and the creeks are maybe too frozen for them to utilize. So a lot of the way we're getting around to these treaties is to walk. That was our main way to get around. We also had runners who could run messages from village to village. So some of our people long ago, that was their specific duty. A lot of these individuals that we learn about throughout history, their specific responsibility could have been to protect the people, could have been to hold on to the ceremonies, could have been an orator, because a lot of our well-known native people in history are wonderful orators. And that's the way that for us, it has always been, is to tell that story orally, to keep the oral traditions alive. And especially during the winter times, we like to reiterate those stories even today for our children. So let's get back to the treaty here. 24 different nations throughout this year of 1764. The summer of July alone seeing 2,000 representatives from various nations and tribes, as far north as the Hudson Bay area, as far west as even there are some Sioux representatives documented that we can see. So you have a vast majority of the country already involved in this international peacemaking extravaganza, this trip. And they're traveling from far. So you're going to see people are arriving, and the way that us native people, we get together, even to this day, we like to show that hospitality. So part of these trips and these treaties, they undertake this show of hospitality and respect to those people who are traveling a great distance, to give them a place to rest, to give them food, to make sure they're comfortable, a place to sleep. So a lot of these old ways to conduct ourselves, we still utilize today in our communities as well. So when these natives are traveling, they expect a certain protocol to be followed. And another reason Sir William Johnson comes into play is because he understands this importance of protocol and this importance of counsel with the native people. One of the most important things he could have done, I think, would probably to get those native people to agree to certain terms within these councils, because that's what they are. They're contracts that are being formed. Each individual wampum that comes in pertains to a certain issue. It pertains to maybe certain expectations of someone between nation to nation. And when these were agreed upon, each nation, they did their best to agree and adhere to those awesome stipulations that create this great peace that we can have. So right now, you should be able to see the actual belt of the 1764. And you see the two individuals on the inside. Now, the way it's explained to me is that they're holding hands, or they're passing this pipe of peace. A lot of times people will talk about a peace pipe, and they think it's a fictitious thing. Well, it really was a ceremony that did carry its way from the western Great Plains all the way into the eastern woodlands. So to burn the tobacco after these contracts on this peace agreement, our sacred Indian tobacco, or our Oyangwa Uwe, we call it, that original tobacco carries those words and those agreements on the smoke as we burn it to the Creator. So you're not only conducting matters between nation and nation, but you're also conducting it to the power of all of us. So you look at that belt, you see the two individuals, and they're holding hands, and everything after that is still looks like it's connected there. This is the path of peace that leads to other nations. Each individual design on there represents another nation that can partake in this peace. Now, on one end, you have a half of a diamond, and on the other, looks like 1.5. Quite possibly, this belt could be connected. It could have meant that that is supposed to come around full circle, and it's supposed to never end like a circle does as we know it. It has no beginning, it has no end. This is something that is supposed to last for a very, very, very long time. The 1764 on there is to signify that date, and it tells us that this wampum belt is relatively big in size. We have a replica here at the fort that we utilize, and it's about 6 feet plus. And there's about 22 to 27 rows in the width of this belt. So it took a extremely amount of skill and knowledge, but also patience to put a belt together like this. Again, you see the colors on there, the contrasting colors, the dark with the light. The dark representing that strife quite often, that difficulty in times, those conflicts, those situations and those issues that need to be resolved. And the light, the white, represents the purity of the good mind and how we need to think all with a good mind and with one mind, so that way we can continue to make these agreements and these terms last forever in the instance of this belt. I like this belt. We often show it here at the fort. It's one of my favorite belts to display, just because it is a really, really good sized belt, and you get a good realization when you can see something of that magnitude on the importance. Another thing that makes it important is there's wampum beads that are utilized. So each individual wampum bead is originally made by hand. However, the one we have at the fort is made of clay, and there are also wampum beads that were made of glass in this period that we're discussing here. They seen the importance of the wampum, and they could trade them, and the natives were using them again in diplomatic proceedings like this one. Again, 24 different nations. The 6 nations were here as well. Also, the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe, the Ottawa. There's so many different nations that were here conducting these matters, these business matters. So it's a pretty important time in history here at Fort Niagara specifically. It gives us an inside look on how things were being done all those years ago. Now, again, we kind of jump back a little bit here to Pontiac and his effect on everything that takes place. It wasn't just Pontiac that was involved in this. There were other warriors as well. I mean, when you have a man that could raise the energy of a people so much to gain, 1,000 people to follow him in his cause, he's pretty influential, but he's not going to be doing all of that on his own. They're going to branch out, and they're going to actually, when they're doing what they needed to do as far as they took concern, what he would do is he would take out smaller forts. So when we talked about them kind of taking over forts, not all of these forts are as grand as you would think Fort Niagara is, because I know everybody thinks Fort Niagara is awesomely big. It's a beautiful, beautiful fort, but these other forts that they're taking are often made of wood, and they're often pretty small. They're garrisoned by sometimes 12 people. So when you have a nice, good-sized war party, and you come upon a small wooden fort, and it's going to take them days and days and days to get reinforcements, or even if they can get the message out. Some of these forts were taken over relatively easy because they were not garrisoned by very many. However, this still kind of builds the morale of the native people, because now we're taking our territory back. They're kind of regaining power and control in their own country. And again, if you look at the underlying reason they're doing this, is because they want to keep that country because it's theirs. A lot of the native nations that are pulled into each side, that's our main objective again, is that we need to focus on still maintaining territory and our culture, our ceremonies, and still continue to exist as a people as we were intended to do so. The Devil's Hole Massacre. This is going on around the same time that Pontiac is doing his thing in the Midwestern Great Lakes there. And again, it leads back to the long contract that the Senecas here in Western New York, they have with the French. They've been portaging the goods for as long as we can see, as long as we can look up, pretty much. And what's going on here is that they create this awesome relationship, again, through council, through wampum. And, you know, it was to the point where they looked at each other, as they say in the video, brothers. They weren't looking at each other as one was better than the other. They were working together to kind of better their people. From the native perspective, you have them giving us all of these goods. It's making our lifestyles easier. It's giving us all these materials and fabrics that are a lot easier to make our clothing with, the tools that we're utilizing to make our houses. So again, it changes our lifestyle, and it makes it easier. And us as Native people, we were always trying to get a hand of that technology because it made life a little easier. Now the French, on their perspective, I think they kind of understood that these guys are going to help us, and they were going to give us these goods. But really, again, we look at the Native perspective of those goods. It's part of a protocol within these old councils that a gift-giving ceremony would take place. So these goods and things like that were expected every time one of these councils would take place, every time a treaty would take place. So during the 1764 Treaty of Niagara, you have over 2,000 natives coming, and you were expected to take care of them. That was part of the protocol. It was a great expense on the British, as they were, you know, focused on pretty much the Mohawk people, and they were dishing out goods relatively all the time. A lot of the expense that Sir William Johnson builds up to be kind of paid by the King of England himself, it was a greater number than a lot of people were using for provisions for the garrisons of certain forts. So it was a big, important idea, an important matter, an important issue for Sir William Johnson to continue to conduct these gift-giving protocols. During the 1764, there was a man by the name of Amherst who was kind of in charge, and he really didn't like the native people in a great deal. He didn't want to utilize them for war. He's in charge of the British Army, I'm sorry, and he's kind of in charge of what's being taken place over here. He actually suggests to give the native people smallpox blankets at this point in history. So way back when, we already have, you know, that germ warfare being thought about to kind of get what they wanted because of this individual's perspective. However, Sir William Johnson kind of outsmarts him a little bit, and he gets sent back to England at this point in history. So now Sir William Johnson can replenish and kind of reaffirm those issues and those matters of peace with the remaining 6 nations, the other nations throughout the Great Lakes. So we're gonna go. We got a couple questions here, and I know and you guys, if you have questions, you know, raise your hand or type in, or however you have to do it. I'm pretty much on layman's terms with this webcast stuff, but we'll get to your questions the best we can. We're going to start with a few questions here. Question number 1 we have is, whose side did the Haudenosaunee people take in the war? Now, the Haudenosaunee, if you understand that terminology of that word, Haudenosaunee, it means people of the Longhouse. So right then, in just that one United Nations, you have, at this point in history, 1764, 6 different nations who are involved with that term. So really, what takes place is, depending on where you're getting your goods from, in the Seneca's instance from the French, the Mohawk instance from the British, it's going to pull you on both sides. You're going to try to do the best for your people as that you can, your individual village, and that's another reason Sir William Johnson was so influential with the Mohawk, is because he becomes established in the Mohawk Valley. He kind of gets immersed in the culture, learns the ways, learns the language, and becomes influential with those skills that he learns. The Haudenosaunee split altogether. Some tried to stay as neutral as they could. The Onondagas quite often tried to stay as neutral as they could. They are the central council fighters for our nation, so that's our capital. Oh, we have a question here. All right, let's take your question.
Okay, this is going to be from Lou and Logan Feeman.
Lou and Logan, all right.
What's the question?
How many men did all the nations have combined going to the treaty?
Combined to the treaty, there was over 2,000 native men just native men at the treaty. But you had also women and children that would follow, because these men, when they're taken away from their families, they still had a responsibility at home to feed their family, to take care of repairs around the house, to be there and provide for their family as well. So when those warriors left, oftentimes their family left as well. So 2,000 representatives that we can see and we can document. So quite a few. So question number 2 is, who was Pontiac? Now, Pontiac, he's really not from this neck of the woods. He's a little further west, in the Michigan area, and he's in Ottawa. He becomes a pretty predominant war captain, and again, with his oration skills, he gets a lot of other people to follow behind him and kind of understand the ways that he's trying to instruct his own people to survive. So, we have a question.
Christopher Chaffee.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. How long did the Treaty of 1764, how long did it last?
Well, we have representatives showing up here in like April, but also you have the whole month of July that I kind of focused on. It has a lot to do with the treaties of the natives themselves. You had the whole month was pretty much stacked back every day. Three different nations coming at a time. You know, the 6 nations at one time, and this takes place for more over a month, from what I have kind of been able to find out and understand. So I hope that answered your question. Well, question number 3 we have down here: how do Native people travel to the Grand Council? And as you've seen in our video, they're rolling up their camp, they're rolling up their bedroll, and they're more than likely walking. Again, you see the snow on there. Now, they may be coming from a distance where, you know, that weather is still often like that. I mean, if you think about the Hudson Bay area, natives coming down from that distance, they're going to go through some different types of weather altogether up until you get here around, you know, June, July. Here at Fort Niagara, July is pretty much the middle, right smack in the middle of the summertime, so it's nice and hot. But if you have to walk, you're going to probably leave quite a few months before you need to be here, depending on the distance. All right, what did Native people think of William Johnson? That's a great question. Coming from a Mohawk perspective and what I see, he's quite often utilized in a good way, but again, depending on your perspective, he's not so good for the people. He's kind of gaining this control, and he's doing it through a custom that we utilize, that gift-giving protocol. So he's utilizing that in a way that's kind of making us dependent on those goods. Was he influential? He was very influential. He helped kind of sculpt this, the way things start to take place here in the eastern woodlands here. So do we have another question?
We do have a question from Abby.
Abby, question from Abby.
Abby, if you can unmute, there you go. Thank you. All right. Ask your question.
Uh-oh.
Okay. Well,
We'll try to get back to you, Abby.
We'll go to Marcus. Did you have a question?
Yes, I did.
All right.
Okay. How effective was Amherst in his campaign?
Initially, he was rather effective. I mean, eventually they stopped using the portage altogether, and he kind of orders the military to make a different, safer way to go after that Devil's Hole Massacre takes place. So upon doing so, it's kind of named Military Road now. And somebody had mentioned to me that that's the original way back up to the upper river to bypass the old portage due to that conflict between the Seneca. The smallpox blankets, he wasn't successful at that at all, because again, Sir William Johnson kind of comes in and gets him called back to England. So, you know, all that animosity, I guess, that dislike and disdain that Amherst had for the native people, utilizing them, he kind of bypasses all that. So he was effective for a little bit, but it really didn't matter.
We're going to try Abby again.
All right, we're going to try Abby. All right.
Go ahead, Abby. Okay, Abby's fooling.
Okay, well, again, Abby, we'll try to get back to you. Another question we thought would be a good topic to kind of discuss was what was the covenant chain? Now, the covenant chain, it's a treaty, it's a wampum belt, it's an agreement between the Haudenosaunee, the Six Nations, and the English. Now, what it kind of reiterates again is that peaceful nature that we're supposed to have with one another, to aid in each other if we need that aid, to feed one another if we need that clothing, to kind of show that hospitality. This wampum belt is actually it symbolizes two men on each end of this a large purple belt. So again, you have that white standing out from the purple, representing that peace, and they're connected by what originally was a rope. Originally, the covenant chain was not a chain. As we kind of need to make things stronger, the chain, the silver chain, is how they often refer to it, is a lot stronger. And if we kind of reiterate those old educational stories, those old treaties, those old agreements, that chain will dust the rust from that, and will keep them strong. So the covenant chain was an agreement. I think we're running out of time here. I hope you guys enjoyed the little talk we had. I enjoyed answering your questions. And again, if you get the chance, hopefully soon we will be able to get back to normal. Everybody stay healthy. Come visit us at the fort when you can. And also this video, it will be up on YouTube shortly after. So if you had somebody that wasn't able to kind of listen in, you can maybe tag them on the page, and they can find that on YouTube. So, okay, thanks. Onahgogare. Enjoy the rest of your day.